Okay, I came through the war and survived. I stayed with the B-29s, went to Alaska, and all the time I got back to the States when I was in one outfit, I went to personnel and made application for entry into pilot training. I wanted to get entry into pilot. It took me 3 years before they finally acknowledged my deal. Because the war was over in '45, I got word that I was accepted for pilot training in the spring of 1949. So I went into pilot training in July of 1949 and took pilot training at Randolph Field, and I flew the AT-6 in basic training at Randolph Field. The AT-6 was the first line fighter pilot training during World War II. When I was advanced and we finished our basic training at Randolph Field, I was assigned to Las Vegas. It was Las Vegas Army Airfield at the time before it became Nellis. It became Nellis when I was stationed out there, but I was assigned out there to go through advanced pilot training in P-51s. I was still a student pilot, and we were flying P-51s. You had to fly that airplane from the time they pulled the chocks until they put the chocks back in, because it was a very touchy thing. It's like a very well-mannered woman. You had to treat her like a lady, very tenderly and everything else, and realize that it was a torque machine on takeoff, which meant that if you don't get that right rudder in on takeoff, that airplane is going to take you someplace you don't really want to go. Which we did. In Las Vegas, we had one student pilot went through, and he got behind the curve on the deal and couldn't control the airplane. The airplane went into a left turn, he couldn't control it, and the airplane went into the snack bar that was right under the tower. And the engine came off, went down the counter, and all the way through, and got a waitress that was in. Okay, the basic thing in conventional aircraft, which is a propeller-driven airplane, is torque. Because the control of the airplane, it's normally the prop will bring it, and torque will cause the airplane to go one way or the other. And the contradiction on the amount of power we used for takeoff, we had to make sure we had the right rudder in and control of the thing. Otherwise, if you didn't have the right rudder in far enough, you could never catch up with the thing, because the torque would pull it to the left and you couldn't do it. And you didn't have airspeed enough to start climbing, and over parts of the runway in a field that you didn't want to put the airplane back down, you were in a completely lost condition. It's a thrill you'll never forget on the thing, because my first ride on the thing is I got it started and everything else and taxied out. And all the way through the taxiing out and everything, he said, I got to land this airplane. I've got to land this airplane. I've got to land this airplane. Because it was a touchy airplane to land. And out there they wanted 3 points all the way through. Landings coming in off the 360 and overhead approach coming down. They wanted that airplane to touch down, 3-point landing, main gear, tail gear, right at the same time. We couldn't do wheel landings. Although we noticed some of the old P-51 pilots, when they'd come in, they'd do wheelers and touch down with the wheels, then lower the tail on the thing. We had to come in and get that exact angle of the aircraft down where it smoothly touched the runway on 3 gears, the 2 main gear and the tail gear, all of the things that. But I finally managed to get the airplane to the point where I felt comfortable landing the airplane. Oh, it was faster and had more capability and everything than the P-40s. It was up in, from World War II, judging on it. It was very competitive with the P-47, the Jug. Because when I got to Europe with the 86th Fighter Group over there, when I graduated from Nellis, I got orders to go to the 86th in Munich, Germany. And they were flying the P-47s. So I got over there and I got checked out in the P-47, the Jug. So I had P-51s from World War II and P-47s from my training there, which I was, at that point on the thing, as kind of stand out on my records later on when I was talking to people. And I always got a kick out of talking later on to some of the guys that did nothing but flew jets. And in jets, I'd talk to a jet pilot about torque, and he said, "Torque, what's that?" The jet engine does not give any torque. Not like that big screw out in front of it that's twisted the airplane like this. The jet has the propulsion out of the back of the thing, and that was it. But I got a kick out of that. Torque, what's that? What was quite concerned to me was the fact that landing the P-47 was no problem. They had the very wide gear on the airplane. You take a look at the airplane, and the gear was way wide. The P-51, the gear was closer in to the fuselage that caused it to lose a little direction control. But the P-47 was an easy airplane to land. It had the wide gear and everything. You just get it lined up in the middle of the runway, and that was it. The P-51, you had to get it there, and you had to get it, still fly it a little bit above the runway until you touched down. Well, the P-51 was a lot more fun to fly. Like I say, she was, if I may use it in terms of, say, treating her like a lady, which means to me, from my pilot's point of view, you gave her all the respect in the world on the thing. And that respect is gained through your knowledge of the aircraft and the basic aircraft and everything else, so that when you got into the thing. And I always told him, I said, well, I'm telling you this, that my experience back in flying fighters is the fact I never went in and climbed into an airplane, my fighter airplane. I went out and put the airplane on, like I'd put on a pair of shoes. I'd get into the cockpit and get comfortable on the thing, get all comfortable on the thing, and I would feel from that point on, through engine start, taxi, and takeoff and everything, I feel I was a part of the airplane. And everything within the airplane was in the touch of my fingers, my thumbs, or my hands, all the way through. And I know what every one of those buttons and switches would do for me all the way through without having to open my eyes and look and see where it is. Because it's one of the closed blindfold checks on cockpits in fighter aircraft. You go out and you had to go around the cockpit and tell, what instrument is this, and what does this do, and what switch is this, and what does it do, and so forth, before I'd go. But I didn't have too much trouble with training. I spent 6 years training fighter pilots at Luke. Trained newly commissioned second lieutenants right out of jet flight school in the 1950s that came out and went through jet fighter training with me. I was a flight commander and operation officer and everything there for 6 years at Luke Air Force Base outside of Phoenix. I went to P-51s and flew P-51s. From there I got assigned to the 86th Fighter Group in Munich, Germany. They had P-47s there. We had them for 2 weeks. Then we took them and flew them over and ferried them down to Italy and gave them to the Italians, all our P-47s. In the meantime, within a week after that, our F-84s were arriving, being flown over by a group of pilots that were checked out on the flight over the ocean to Germany. F-84 Thunderjet, yeah, it's a straight wing. And then later on they had well, in World War II, the prop airplane in World War II from Republic was the Thunderbolt. Then the F-84 came on, and it was the Thunderjet. And then we had the one that the F-84F was a jet aircraft that superseded the straight wing F-84E. First jet I flew was in Germany, the F-84. What did I think? I said, "Where's the torque?" No, it was an experience on the thing, because everything to me was a lot simpler. The jet engine, the starting procedures, everything was so much more simplified on the thing. And flying it was, you didn't have to worry about RPM mixture and everything else on the thing. With a conventional engine, it was a propeller-driven conventional engine, had gas that came through a distributor and carburetor and all that stuff on the thing. The jet engine had a deal that put the fuel right in on the burn tank back there that had the rotors on the thing that compressed the air that went into the turbine, and into the turbine it was further compressed into the deal that went out of the tail of the airplane with a force we call thrust on the thing. It would give the thrust and the boost to the jet. I don't know. I always went through in my fighter team. I was leaning toward the old conventional fighters all the way through, and I had that 6 years in jet training fighter pilots in Luke. Then I got sideswiped because I was at Luke, and the assignment to Luke was a CHURS assignment. A CHURS assignment. It was a good deal flying, because the guys that went into fighter outfits and flew fighter outfits all over the world only flew now and then on the thing, and they didn't fly as many missions. At Luke, on their training situation, I flew every day with students flying gunnery missions and bombing missions and everything, teaching these kids how to fly a fighter and control a fire and control the ordnance to deliver it properly and everything else, up to the point where I taught them air combat maneuvering tactics with the airplanes up there, where we'd do nose-to-nose wrestling at 40,000 feet. You had a new atmosphere. There's a new arena all the way through on the thing. That you had of course, the airplane was different with the prop airplane was more responsive to immediate deal with power and everything else. You got immediate response on anything. Jet was a little slower to get the power necessary to do what you wanted to do with it all the thing. So it was always a contest of maintaining speed, altitude, and location, and everything else, and also it's just the basic deals with air combat maneuvering was always, got to see the guy first. You see him first, you got that advantage. So we always operated from that position all the way through, from there into the pact when you did make contact, what maneuvers you could do with doing the scissors maneuvers or anything else. Flameout is the lack of sufficient oxygen and air into the combustion chamber of the jet engine to support combustion and thrust out the rear. That's a flameout. Yes, just like this, and the rotors would just stop. You get a little light on the thing that gives you an amber light and the red light. Red light usually indicates a fire is involved with the thing. We had one case at Luke Air Force Base that we had one of the, I think it was a French pilot, because we trained NATO pilots through Luke all the way through. We had Turkish pilots and French pilots and all the other ones on the thing that came through. But a French pilot down on the TAC range, we had a TAC range down there where we taught them how to deliver napalm. And I know that one of the things we've always briefed them on the thing says if you're in a flight with other people delivering napalm on the thing, stay clear of the napalm blast, from the napalm fire of the guy ahead of you all the way in the thing, because if you fly through where the fire ball has come up and everything through that area and the thing, you're going to get a flame out due to the fact that that area there has no air for the engine, and that loss will cause an immediate flame out, and you'll be hard pressed to get back in business again, which was an easy thing to do, because all they had to do is get the nose up into the air a little bit where the air is and hit the restart button on the thing, and it would restart most cases. He got it restarted. He got an instructor. He says, hit the restart button, get the nose up, hit the restart button. Okay. It's okay, sir. I like the engine to start now. Okay. It never happened to me in any way at all. I never had any troubles with jet engines. That we had F-84s at Luke Air Force, straight wings. Then we got the F-84Fs, the swept wings. Then we got the F-100s. We got some of the first classes in the F-100 training out of pilot training, because the kids go through undergraduate pilot training in T-33s, the old Lockheed jet. They had to learn how to fly a T-bird and all the thing, and then they'd be jumping into the F-100, which immediately was a welcome to the world of afterburner. Which they always got thrilled out of. Jet, normal jet, you throw the power to it and everything, just go down the deal. With the F-100, we had afterburners in the thing, so on the takeoff roll, I had 5-second roll and hit the afterburner, and then just a kick in the butt, and that boost from the afterburner gets you down on the road, and before long you're airborne 300 knots and climbing out. But my experience handling these young men on the thing, that I take pride in the fact that I had the first group of German students that went through fighter gunner training in the States here. I had a group of 16 young German pilots that were 20 years old in 1958. They went through training there in 1958 in the F-84F on the thing. My only regret on that was the fact I never kept track of them to the point of making contact with them, because another 10-15 years later, my wife and I took a trip to Europe, and we were over there for 2 months, and I so would have liked to have had some addresses to some of those pilots over there that were in Germany that we could have visited. I left Luke in 1959 because I was shanghaied into missiles. I'll take a little side story here now on the thing, and relative to my entry in the service and everything else. I went through elementary school in Julesburg, Colorado, and we had a teacher there that was our teacher when I was in the 6th, 7th grade on the thing. In 1941, he and another teacher from high school, they left this teaching profession. I went into cadet training, and through cadet training, Larry Gardner, he was an elementary teacher. He went into cadet training on the thing, and he washed out of pilot training and went through navigation training. In 1941, it was commissioned, and he was in the Air Corps during World War II. In fact, he was on the B-29, B-17 that ferried part of the crew of MacArthur from the Philippines to Australia. Anyhow, I kind of followed him on the Air Force times and everything through his career, and he was still in the Air Force and everything else, and he finally retired just about at that time I did, or maybe a little before, I don't know, immaterial, but we ran into each other again at a reunion in Julesburg, a high school, or the school reunion there in 1985. It was my wife's 40th high school reunion. And I ran into Larry down at the swimming pool at the hotel and the thing, and I talking to him about the thing. And at the time, I had retired as a full colonel. Larry was still a lieutenant colonel. He retired as a lieutenant colonel. He just, somewhere or another, he didn't impress the right people or fill in the right squares or anything else, but I didn't hold that. It was not mentioned anyway at all, but talking to him, I told him about my career, and I said, I got ramrodded into missiles out of Luke when I was flying fighters there on the way through, that we volunteered to go into missiles, which we thought we were going to the Jupiter missile in Italy, and we ended up going to the Stark missile in Presque Isle, Maine. And he said, yeah, I remember that, because he said, I was working at the Pentagon at the time, and I sat at the table when we decided where to get those people to fill that requirement for the Stark missile, and we got all your old fighter pilots down there that within the thing. And I looked at him, I said, thanks, because the worst part of my career in the Air Force is serving in missiles. I tell people this, I said, I served in 3 wars, and the Korean War was not one of them. And they said, "Oh, really? Which wars?" And I said, "I was in World War II, Tinian, B-29s. I said, "I was in the Cold War, Salina, Kansas, the Atlas missile. We were at war. It was called the Cold War, where I sat with my weapon out there, and we'd worked our butts off, and we had a green board. And we had a green board that says, 'Ready for countdown.' I had a deputy there that had a key. I had a key. We had a radio there that every now and then went deedle, 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 and get a message out. And we were waiting for that one message that would come through. And I can tell you this, it was classified during the time on the thing. But if we had a red dot message in 5 parts coming through, we knew without even copying that it was a launch order. A red dot message was action on our part. A red dot message in 5 parts was an active deal, and that's launch the missile. So I said, I'm sitting there with my deputy over there, and we're waiting for all this stuff in here because we got a missile sitting down a 180-foot hole out there, and we got a key, and he's got a key, and if we turn them both within a second of each other, we can launch that missile. Stress. There's stress involved with they're waiting on that thing and waiting for the thing, and the only thing you can do is sit there and look at that green board and this, that, and the other thing, and perform your checks and everything else during your 24-hour duty that you're on duty out there. It was lousy duty all the way through. I served in the SAC command post at Presque Isle, Maine. I was a duty controller of the command post on the thing. We got all the messages back and forth through that area on their communications and everything else. Plus, we always got current information relative to everything going on. So during that time on the thing, I was on the SAC command post in 1960-61. And I was at the command post in there when the Bay of Pigs started up and the war was there, which at the time sitting there at the command post, I was just waiting as a SAC controller and not another controller in any way at all. But we were waiting for that message that says we're getting on the edge of doing everything and pulling all the bunches all the way through. And that's as close as I came to being in a wartime situation there, where I had had enough training and information relative to nuclear weapons and everything else to realize the fact that there was no way to correct the error of dropping one and putting things back in the proper order for the city and the swimming pools and the schools and everything else. It was a complete destruction of a way of life for a whole city all the way through, and the increase in the potential increased broadcast after broadcast on the intelligence coming through. Yeah, and we finally ended up that I had a missile on one site out here that was a 24 megaton missile on board. That would have been enough to wipe out the whole area of Moscow on a thing. But I'd say this to the fact that the stress involved with the thing was worse than what I had in a wartime situation when I was flying fighters and they were shooting at me in Vietnam. Okay, they closed down McNamara, the Secretary of Defense at that time, closed down the Atlas missile in November of 1964. And he closed them down just after they'd had that Bay of Tonkin deal going on over there, where the Vietnam War heated up quite a bit over there with that. They must have had the feeling that they did not use the Atlas missile, did not need it for the Cold War at the time. I don't know who the head shrinkers up at the Pentagon were thinking about doing up there and where their information came from to make decisions like that. I was beyond my control. The whole Atlas missile program went through. The reaction from the Salina citizens and the commissioners and everything else, we dealt with the commissioners quite a bit on the availability of those things that were being released by the Air Force. Because the Air Force, first on base closing on the thing, the base closing on the thing says, this base is closing and these operations will cease to function and so forth. So they put word out to a lot of the other Air Force bases that are still going to be in business, saying if you need anything like this that could help, fine, like fire trucks and fuel trucks and everything else that could be transferred from the closing base on the thing. Once they go through that period of time of choosing and selling this stuff all to the bases that need it or said they needed it on the thing, we sat there and we itemize it all and work with the commissioners of the city of Salina to say, we have this stuff available out here, and do you want the fire station? And they said, oh yes. So they got the base fire station out there. We helped transferred that with 2 or 3 trucks and everything else on the thing. Went through the whole legalization of the Salina, taking care of the water well out here south of town off Waterwell Road. That was a big deal out there, that Salina at that time was looking for good clean water. We got along very fine with the base closing people. I got along with the sheriff in town pretty good and talked to him, and because during one portion of the base closing I had control of the air police on the base, along with other factions in there, safety and other little things that I was, as deputy commander, in charge of running all the way through on the thing. So I got close relationship that I helped and didn't overuse it in any way at all. Because we had any of our airmen that got into trouble or everything else, I could go down and talk to the police chief and we'd talk it through to make sure that justice was served all the way through on both sides. The base out there was closing down, and in review of what was existing within Salina at the time of the closure on the thing was the multitude of housing units in Salina here that were actually subpar for families and things like that were rented out at high prices to airmen, young airmen, and their wives and everything else on the thing. I came here in 1961 from Presque Isle, Maine. That's when the Atlas missiles first started in here, and they started capping the deals with the hole and putting the missiles in the ground. I was here until the middle of 1966. I came out of training in missiles and got assigned to Beale Air Force Base. I served for about 6 months as the base paper shuffler, called the base director of administrative services. Desk job. It was a desk job, and it was worse than missiles all the way through. But in 1966, the word got out because the war in Vietnam had heated up to the point that they put out a deal on looking for pilots on the thing. And I was the director of administrative services there, and I had the control of the message center, and all the technical data and everything came to the base, processed it through me and everything else all the way through on the thing. And just after New Year's on the thing, I went back to work and everything, and I was walking down the hall of the headquarters building down toward my office on the thing, and the sergeant came up the walk on the thing, had a piece of paper in his hand, and he says, "Just a minute, Colonel," he says, "I have a message here with your name on it." And I said, "Huh?" And he says, "Yeah." And I looked at the message, and the message says, "I, Norman Repp, Lieutenant Colonel so-and-so and so, is assigned to the 14th Air Commando Squadron, Pt.2, in Vietnam, flying the A-1 Sky Raider." And I said, "What's an A-1? I didn't even know what the airplane was, but I entered into the deal, and we entered in training for the Air Commando squadrons over there. And I went through training, went to Vietnam, worked through as ops officer for the 1st Air Commando Squadron, commanded the squadron for a little while, and ended up commanding the 6th Air Commando Squadron during my last 5 months over there. I flew 283 combat missions over there. in an A1. The A1 was a prop-driven airplane. It was a prop airplane that had the R-3350 engine. The R-3350 was the same engine, but there were 4 of them on a B-29, but it was the same engine, but they had one on the A1. It was the same engine, but it still put out that 2,700 horsepower on the thing that gave us a big boost, and we could carry a load of 8,000 pounds of bombs on board the A1. That's where I got 4 DFCs. DFC for heroism. I was in support of the rescue of a team of 12 special forces that were being overrun by a bunch of bad guys over there. That was of superior numbers and everything else. And I was down in a position where I did ground fire suppression and isolation of the deal, and then ground fire suppression, and helped the Jolly Green helicopter coming in. I was doing suppression of the ground fire around the LZ there while he came in and lowered down and picked those 12 people up out of that center of that LZ down there and got them out of the way. Otherwise they had been overrun. Firing airplanes, an airplane that I can fire bullets down to them so that they put their gun down and run for cover. That's suppression. It turns off their ground fire down here. The FAC was a forward air controller that was flying a very light airplane like a Piper Cub or something, but he was directing the control and had contact with the ground people down there through an FM radio. No missile problem in South Vietnam. Now the fast movers in the F-105s up in North Vietnam, they had the missile, the sites up there. There were, what do they call them? Anyhow, they were the bad missiles that could intercept it.
Were they radar driven?
Yeah.
Or heat seeking, right? I guess heat seeking.
Well, I guess all kinds of advanced technology with all the missiles at that time could be heat seeking or noise or anything else on the thing. That was off the end of the board for my business, and my business was just directing my 25 pilots or 25 airplanes and 27 pilots I had, getting them through.